Hey man, salam alaikum.
Hey, walaikum salam, Kareem. How's it going?
It's good. It's better now that I'm here on the line with you, and
Nice.
I'm really glad that we were able to find this time just to get together and chat. It's been a minute. I know there's a few other things that we've had an opportunity to catch up about recently, but like it's been a minute since we had a chance to talk about this story, and so I'm actually excited to talk with you about your Muslim future story and kind of like get into the Wayback Machine and dial it back a few years to like when we were first creating this and kind of how it lands with you now. Not only personally and creatively, but also like politically, because we're in like a super different time now than we were a few years ago when we first wrote this, right? And
100%.
obviously recognizing like things like Islamophobia didn't just pop up in the last few years, of course. We've been struggling with this our whole lives and generations. But I'd be remiss if I didn't, put a finger on the fact that like things are a lot more dangerous right now in this climate
100%.
in the year 2026. And so I think it'll be really I think it'll be really good for us to kind of unpack your story and your thoughts around kind of this anthology and just like this idea of a Muslim future, and especially in the current climate. And so I'm just really excited to have that opportunity to kind of dig into that with you. And I appreciate you making the time.
Yes, I am so excited. This was a really big thing for me, this story, so I'm excited to talk about.
Sweet. Well, why don't we just get started then with the basics? Tell us what your story is called, and what it's about, just in brief.
Oh my god, I forgot the name of the story. Hold on. It's
That
one
that is okay, only because it's a very long and very specific number that is
right,
included in your title.
right, which we talked about this and I was like, "Hey, Kareem, we should just call this A Million Good Deeds." And you're like, "No, man, this is much better if we call it 1,034,623 good deeds." Did I get it right?
I mean, let's say that. Let's say that that's what it's called, right?
It's a
We'll go
very
back
specific
in,
number.
we'll change the manuscripts to fit, like, what you
Whatever this
actually
is.
said just now.
Yes.
Yeah, totally, we can make that happen.
It is, and it's so funny when I was writing it, I wanted to do like an over a million D, and I just did kind of like, this is creative, everyone. Writing, this is writing. I just like typed in numbers, and I was like, you know what, this is gonna be it. 1,034,623 good Ds. That's what it's gonna be. So
You're
yes,
lucky
that is
number
the
now.
name. Yes, the number. That is the name. And what's so interesting is thinking about this. That's the name of the title of the short story, which is the first short story I have ever written, and it's
Mm,
also the first short story, film, etc., that I have written alone.
mm.
And I remember I have so much love and respect for Kareem, is that when you came to me, you're like, "Hey, man, I'm creating this Muslim future thing. I would love for you to be a part of it." I was like, "Kareem, I'm really not like this type of writer." And he's like, "You can do it." He's like, "You are. You said you could do it." And I was like, "Okay." You said I
Okay,
can
I
do
talk
it.
about myself in the third person too.
And I'm like, if Kareem said I can do it, I can fly. So, but it was very interesting because I know that you originally came to me because I am, as jovial as I am, a comedic filmmaker. So, you're like, oh, it'd be really great if we could bring some comedy in here. And then I was like, guess what, Kareem? Pain, 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 pain. So the story is about a woman going through divorce. So when Kareem did come to me, I was going through a very tumultuous divorce, and it was incredibly traumatic for me. And I was like, as most artists are, how can we process what we're going through? And the best way is through art. And so I think, Kareem, you gave me this gift to give me this like avenue to really process it and really think of it instead of kind of like, when you're going through this process of divorce, you really can't grasp anything around you. You really can't figure things out. And I remember my process started in May, and then we met with each other in July. And I remember going through the breakdown process of it and trying to figure out what I was going to do, and it really kind of came together through that year. So it was really, I always talk about this with other people that are going through divorce. Your first year is like you really can't, you're drowning and you don't know what's going on in your world, and you're just really trying to breathe. And so this really did hone me in that aspect. The story is about a woman that's going through a divorce, and I've also never written sci-fi, and so it was, but I love Black Mirror. Black Mirror thing, and like the Muslim futures kind of aspect is the way I kind of frame it. And I have always had this obsession with good deeds and bad deeds in Islam. So when I was a kid, it was like extra credit, like smile at someone, extra credit. Don't do like, give someone money, extra credit, yell at someone, bad credit. Like, it's like, and I just see the angels on my shoulder going, ding, 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 ding. Like, so I was like, hey, what if I use that somehow in this aspirational future? How can I use the Muslim good deeds and bad deeds in aspirational future? So I came up with this concept of this woman who was going through this divorce, was not accepting it, and was a really good person. Like she had that number, 1,000,006,000, whatever the number is, good deeds. Um, and in this world, for all Muslims, non-Muslims, everybody could see each other's good deeds. And so you could see these deeds, and it would change the world into a way that everybody started becoming better people because you could see their good deeds and you could see their bad deeds. Very similar to a kind of Black Mirror look. And so then I wanted to create a way to this woman can use her good deeds to go back into time to try to save her marriage, and that is what the story is about.
There's so much in what you just said, both from like your deep personal connection to the story, and that there's, some aspects of it that are really, closely mirroring experiences that you might have had, or slightly changed and fictionalized in ways just to, protect your emotional barriers. Um, and I think like between that and like giving you the opportunity to kind of stretch your creative practice in a way that I think is really exciting. I mean, um, and then really thinking about just like the layers of the world that you build. It's like it's such a like this story in particular, it's such an interesting confluence of like all these different elements from like your own personal experience to like some of the science fiction angles of it to the magical realism kind of piece of it. It's like, I don't know, it's an interesting mashup of genres in a way that I think is like really unexpected. And like, even though you don't qualify it as a comedy, like, it has still this kind of, like, lighthearted, like, spirit to it. You still, like, find these moments to, like, infuse a really heartfelt, like, emotional, like, in some cases, really, like, devastating experience, like, with moments of levity. Like, I'm thinking about just this premise of, like, this idea that you can sort of, like, exchange your good deeds, that you can use them as currency in a different way is so interesting. And then thinking about, like, what your main character does when she goes back in time and the interactions that she has with her family, like, you still find ways to bring, like, some really interesting lightness to it that I found really refreshing. And, like, I'm always excited by stories that kind of like defy genre conventions in that way.
Mm.
And so like, it's so, and I think some of that is kind of baked into the premise too, right? In that, well, there's so much like there's so many stories in which futurism and dystopia are like intimately intertwined and like inextricably linked. But like the way that we're sort of trying to figure out how do you actually entwine um science fiction, not with utopia, but with like protopia, where it's like there's some kind of incrementally better sort of like version of the world, but we still struggle. We still have emotional heartache. We still have loss that we struggle with in our lives. And I think your story is such a great way to manifest that by creating something that is emotionally difficult, but also not sort of like overpowering in that, and that you're able to find light in it. Anyway, I just think there's a lot of ways in what you just said that I think find
I mean, I
really
never
cool.
thought about the levity into it, but you're right, like, it's embedded in me, like, I have to figure it out, like, how I can bring the levity to the situation.
Yeah, and
And, trauma comes from comedy. I mean, comedy comes from trauma.
you bring the story to a hopeful place as well, right? Even
Yes,
though
I
it's
do.
about a really difficult emotional, journey, and not to give away the ending, but, like, we end in a place of hope, right? And I
Yes.
think that is so much that's, like, wired into a lot of these stories, which I think is really important. I would love also for you to speak a little bit more because you glossed over this a little bit, and I kinda wanna dig in a little bit more into, like, the aspirational world that you created because, like, this premise of being able to see how many, good deeds and bad deeds people had, and the idea that that transparency, like, somehow motivates people to be better, like, is something that's really interesting to me, and I'd just love to hear you flesh out a little bit more of, like, what that looks like in terms of the aspirational world that it's created, like because as with these stories, what we see is, like, the tip of the iceberg of the world building, and there's so much more under the surface, and, like, I would love for you, if you feel comfortable with it, to go a little bit beneath the surface in terms of some of the dynamics of this world that maybe we don't see super clearly, or maybe we just get a glimpse of that we could unpack a little more.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's so fun to be able to, like, in sci-fi, like, kinda defy the rules in ways, like, and you were saying there's so many different genres, and we talked about this too because it was really sci-fi, but also magical realism with the going back in time, and I'm, like, such a kind of a, like, stay in the world, stay in the tone type of, filmmaker that it was really fun to be able to do this because it's not something that I usually do, particularly in comedy. It's like, "Are you gonna go broad? Are you gonna go smart? What are you gonna do?" And so, um based off like what you said in the introduction, the phobias, right? The Islamophobia, the xenophobia, all of those things. And when we were talking and we were brainstorming together, it was like, what is your aspirational future? And I think my aspirational future is the world's aspirational future where there is no phobias, right? Like we are all kind of one. And I think that in the world that I was thinking of is like we took from all different religions and cultures. And in our part is the good deed part. Like the good deed part is what the Islam brought to it. And it was just normalized, right? There was no, she comes in, she still does wear hijab. She comes in, no one is like making us think about anything. No one's thinking of any other ways about it. And that, you know, I have this concept and also really brought to my mind during the divorce is good people and people that are very flawed, or like someone that's done really well their entire life, has done so much good all of their life, but it's still at the end of the day they suffer in like this unfair aspect. Like the level of unfairness that happens in our world, like particularly what's happening in Palestine and Congo and Sudan and like everywhere, Venezuela. Like, I mean, it's just the unfair level and how we have no control is very hard for me and it's very difficult. And I'm like, can we get to a world where that does count, right? Can people be held accountable? What is accountability? And so, what would accountability look like if someone saw it? Now, of course, I can go into a whole different direction. Like, this could be a series, right? Like, these people are like, well, I did this bad deed and now everybody thinks I'm just bad, blah, blah, blah. Like, I've gone into all those different directions. But my idea was everybody's good deeds were higher, right? Like, we just lived in a positive world where everybody wanted to do good and everybody was aspiring to do good and everybody's accountable for things that they did in a community way that wasn't like super negative. So, that's really kind of the idea that I was thinking in the world is like how much bad there is in the world and how can we make it to a more peaceful, hopeful community aspect by using this crazy idea in our religion, which I mean, not crazy, but the good deed, bad deed thing.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit more about, because I know we mentioned earlier like that this was sort of um like a creative stretch for you, right? And that you'd never written science fiction before. I don't know how much you are a consumer of science fiction or stories about the future, but I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit about sort of like what were some of your influences too, and like when you think about futurism and when you think about this particular story, not only what were some of your influences, but then also in comparison to that, like what is it about the idea of a Muslim future that was, like, generative for you in terms of coming up with this story?
Yeah, so definitely in terms of inspiration, I had mentioned this before, was the Black Mirror episode. I think that
Right, right,
really,
right, right.
yeah, really helped me being like, oh, these rules have been broken. But particularly the Black Mirror episode, which I think everybody talks about, where like they replay the memories.
Ah, mhm.
I don't remember that one, but like that one was, oh, that's really kind of what inspired me to make this in terms of like that. And then of course, time travel. I'm not a science fiction writer myself. Now I am, check check. But
You are. You are.
I just consume like kind of whatever we did in the mainstream, like Back to the Future, like any kind of like time
My
travel,
gosh.
groundhog.
Classic.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
Groundhog Day. I mean,
classic.
we call it time travel. I don't know, but it's like the world happening over again
We
over.
could we could have a very long discussion about whether or not Groundhog Day is time travel.
Yes, we should totally, and it's comedy, right? Because you think about like the different comedy kind of try and travels, and then like Freaky Friday. Like I don't know, like is that time travel ish?
I would not call that time travel, but I would be curious to hear your rationale for why you think that is time travel.
Well, I
I'm
guess
not
not
saying it's
time
not. I'm just saying I wouldn't have thought about it as a time travel movie.
character time travel
Okay.
because they're switching age groups, and so it's time travel for them in terms of because when someone was when she was 12, it was in 1970, but really now it's
Okay.
1990. You know what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
So she doesn't know how to be a kid in the 90s because she was a kid in the 70s.
Hmm.
Come on,
I'm
come on.
thinking now you're making me think about, like, 13 going on 30 as,
Yes,
like,
there's
a
good.
but that is a time travel movie because she jumps forward
Oh, you're right.
into her adult body, right?
Yes.
We're going down a rabbit hole, but that's
Okay.
okay.
Anyways, um, but yeah, so we often talk about roads and borders and institutions that what shape the world, but stories are infrastructures too. So right now, the dominant stories about Muslims are built from like crisis, fear, absence. But creating art with Muslim futures isn't just like obviously like what we're always trying to do, which is about representation. It's about rebuilding these narratives and the infrastructure people use to understand each other. And so when that infrastructure is broken, empathy collapses, and I see how art is the way that we repair it. So yeah, I mean, we're also living in this era where the documenting Muslim pain, it's like constant. It's like we're just constantly seeing it, and it's rarely about Muslim complexity. And that's why I super love what you are doing here as producing these, because you have 12 of these stories that are so different, right? And that we're all trying to find an aspirational future, and this is what I love about art in general. Um, and so you're creating an art and like an archive, that represents joy, contradiction, humor, faith. And as you know, we always say this over and over, if we don't author these stories ourselves, history will only remember us through a certain type of lens, which at this point is always violence. And art is how we decide how it survives. And art doesn't argue for humanity; it lets people feel it. And that's really kind of the goal for this, for me, and for the whole situation.
That's so well said. I love the way that you talk about this as an archive, right? Like an archive of futures. We're creating an archive of a multiverse of possible futures for our communities. Um, and I think, yeah, like there's a lot to talk about in terms of like what is the value of archive now in this particular moment, particularly within our political climate, our industry, obviously, like seeing so much oppression, so much complicity with fascism, so much contraction, so much erasure in terms of our stories. So there's a lot to dig into there in terms of like what is the value of creating an archive from within a community, whether that's an archive of the past, an archive of what we're experiencing in the here and now, or an archive of what we dream our futures to be. And so I love that you put that frame around it because I think that's so vital, especially right now in the year 2026, right? And, as we kind of alluded to at the beginning of this conversation, um, we wrote these stories a few years ago. And, we took some time, like, adapting them into a graphic novel format because there's a comic book adaptation of many of the stories that are coming out. It took us some time to sort of like bring the book to market. And while that was happening, like, things have changed pretty dramatically in the world around us. I think, this is nothing new what we're experiencing right now, but it's certainly like an escalation and a heightening and a, more dangerous sort of like crystallization of a lot of things we've been experiencing our whole lives. But, it feels like in many ways, and it's true in many ways, like the stakes have been raised. And so as you think about the value of this story and the value of an aspirational future, an aspirational Muslim future in general, um, what is the new significance or heightened significance that you think about in terms of these stories reaching an audience now in the year 2026, as opposed to a few years ago when we first started working on this project?
Oh, it's a great question. I mean, it's so sad that a genocide brings in like relevance to who we are as humans. And but sadly, just like, the Trump election did the same thing in 2016 with Hollywood, it has opened up mainstream world or the world's audiences to our stories. And so instead of coming into it, we all have bias, and that's just the way world works. And so instead of coming into it with this majority bias, I feel like now, and hopefully in 26, and I hope for all the audiences that are going to read this, are going to be coming into this with a sense of humanity instead of, fear or, some sort of bias. And once they read all the stories, they're going to, it's like, the background of the Muslimness will not be a part of it. It's gonna be about a part of this world that we wanna create together as a community, and that's really what I'm hoping that our anthology does.
I love that. I love that. Is there anything else that you feel like you would want readers, who read this anthology and read your story in particular to walk away from your story thinking or feeling, whether that's something personal or something about our experience as a community? Like, if you could distill the thing that you want a reader, not necessarily the thing, but one thing that you might want readers to walk away from your story thinking or feeling, what might that be?
Oof, that's a good question. Well, I think in general, that for my story in general, that, like, there is hope. There is life after divorce, even though it has been a huge part of your life, and particularly in our religion, like, it's considered half of your deen, and so there's so much built on that, so when it breaks you, and that's okay. To process that breaking, to process it whatever way that you need to process it, and to know that there is hope and there is a future that looks different, but that is a great part of your life that's coming. And the biggest thing actually is that community is what's gonna always hold you.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Um, I really appreciate you taking the time, man, to sit down and talk through the story with me. It was really great to just like kind of dig into it again. It feels like, I mean, I know it's clear that it's a story that like continues to live with you in so many different ways, and like I had just really appreciated this opportunity to kind of dig back not only into like the really sort of deep emotional journey that your character goes through, but also just like the aspirational world that you've created, and this idea of like really landing in a place of hope, which is like something like I definitely need on a daily basis. I need reminders of hope. And so like this conversation is a great reminder for me of that. And hopefully the anthology will be this collection of reminders of hope for everyone who reads it, to continue to persevere. So I appreciate you taking the time. It's great to chat with you.
Thank you, it's always great to chat with you, Kareem. Thank you so much.
So for folks who are watching this out in the internet, there'll be a link to pre-order your copy of Muslim Futures, both as a fiction anthology and also as a graphic novel anthology, somewhere probably down there.
Yes, please, please get the book.